Hi everyone. So पिछली वीडियो में we learned about Flask, how we can create APIs in Flask, and we use simple route approach. What we did was we were creating routes only, but instead of rendering templates, which we were doing in Mad1 project, instead of rendering templates, now we were sending the data, and data was sent in the form of JSON objects, and we could have nested data as well. So how the way we wanted to send the data, it depends on the developer of the application, but we created some APIs. That's the some review or the summary of what we have done in previous video. We did not use any libraries which could help us or ease our implementation of creating APIs. We will do in next video, but in today's video we would be using Flask Security, and we will be learning about how we can use Flask Security. Okay, let me tell you one thing, like why do we need to use Flask Security? In your problem statement, it is mentioned that we have to implement role-based access control. And when we say role-based access control, that some resources which are restricted to use for an admin, they can be used by admin only, and for the applications or the role the functions which are meant for users, they can only be accessed by the users. So that what that is meant by role-based access control. Now we have an authentication token which needs like we have to implement an authentication token as well. So the problem statement says that you have to use a role-based access control with an authentication token. What do you mean by, and what do you understand by authentication token? Authentication token can be considered as an key which you have, or basically every user of your application will have. When you go to the server with a particular request to access a particular resource, you give that key, and if you are allowed to access that resource with that particular key, the server will return back. So if the authentication is with you, is for an admin role, but you are an admin and you have an authentication token, when a request is sent to the server, it will check what is the role of this particular user, and whether first it will check whether you are an valid user or not, because every user will have a unique authentication token. You can consider of this authentication token some strings, is there some string of random numbers and integer alphabets. Right, so that's what we have to implement. And how do we do that? So when we created APIs, right, we had some headers, we had body. So in header, we along with other meta information about our browsers, who is your client and stuff like that, we also send the authentication token. We'll see what I mean by we are sending an authentication token in headers, but that's what we're gonna do. Flask Security has a few requirements about how our models have been implemented for users. So I have an image, like I have whenever I conduct these sessions, I observe that many people prefer to create a user model like this because it is simpler and easier to implement, and you may or may not have implemented such a user in your application in your Mad1 project, but you can think of this user model as you have username, email ID, password, and there you have a role which stores a string, like whether it's an admin or user. So they create one user, one model which is handling your role-based access control as well as user. But Flask Security requires you to do something else. What Flask Security asks you to do is, it asks you to implement your role-based your models in this particular fashion. You can see this image is visible on your screen now. So what do you have is, you have one user model where you store all the credentials of the user. We don't store the role for this particular user, but we store all the necessary information which we want to store for the user except the role, right? And then we have another model which is for the role, where we store the descriptions and what all various roles which we have. For example, in an application you can have an administrator, you can have a manager, you can have a normal user, right? The three roles which I just said. So you describe what is the role ID for these three users, and what is the description. You can put some description also. So these two things are not connected right now. One is a role which just have a meta information about what role it is, what is a description, or some other information as well. Maybe in future when you are creating a large scale application, you can also store which all resources are accessible for this particular role, stuff like that. Or maybe you can set on all permissions, which role has which permissions and stuff like that also can be stored in the role model. But now in the user model, you don't store any information about what role it has or something stuff. You just store the information which is relevant for a user, like its email address, its password address. And now you create a secondary table, which you can see on the screen over here. Why do we create the secondary table? Is to connect the role, to connect the user with its role. And so now with this setting, we can have multiple roles to a particular user. For example, a particular user who can be your administrator as well as your manager, because you want to give both permission, which for an administrator as well as your manager to the particular user. You can use the secondary table to store information, because neither your user ID nor your role ID is your primary key. You have a different primary key, but now you can have two rows into this particular table, and then you can store the information. So that's the idea, that's the change which you have to, and this is important, this is compulsory to implement. And the reason why I'm saying, because Flask Security mandates that your model should have a following structure, that it should have a user model, it should have a role model, and it should have a secondary table which connects these two models. So that's the idea, that's the change you have to make in the models. And let's with this information we'll start creating our models first, because in order to implement the Flask Security, we need to have models, the database ready. So you can see over here that I have a row template. I have imported something from the Flask. I have imported Flask JSONify request, and we have just initialized the application, and the rest we have to implement right now. So first we need to create the models, and I'm assuming that you know what an Flask SQL Alchemy is and you have worked with it. So if you don't know, please go through it once to understand why we are using Flask SQL Alchemy, how this Flask SQL Alchemy helps us. So first what we will do is we'll import from Flask SQL Alchemy. Import. Okay, first let me check whether Flask SQL Alchemy is there in my system. Let me install Flask SQL Alchemy. All right, and we checked that we had Flask SQL Alchemy. It is installing Flask SQL Alchemy. It was not there in my server first, so I used the command pip install Flask SQL Alchemy to install the dependencies. So once it is done, we'll continue back, and yeah. Now I have imported the Flask SQL Alchemy. First we need to do is we need to create an object of this Flask SQL Alchemy object, and once we are done with it, now we are ready to define the models. So first we need to have a user model, which we will be creating with this command. As let's say we have an ID, which would be dp dot I'm assuming that you understand these syntax like primary key, username, password, and whatever the syntax which you have come. You are very familiar with this because you have done it in your Mad1 project. So I'm not going to explain this in detail. But if you want me to explain, create a video on Flask SQL Alchemy, you can comment down on this video. I will create a new video where I'm explaining how to understand SQL Alchemy, or to be precise, how to understand Flask SQL Alchemy. You can put down that in the comment box below. But let's create the rest of the models. Class role. just give me a few minutes to explain. Let me complete this code, and then I'll explain what we are doing over here. Right. So we have created these user role. I have not put an address, email address, and stuff like that. But this thing is very familiar to all of you, right? Where we have an user model, we have a role model, and we have user role. And these models we have created, each model has this user model has two attributes. One is username and password. If you want to add additional columns, you can put that over here. Similarly, for the role, we have name and description, and for the user role, which is connecting these two models, we have defined user ID and role ID. Okay, now we want to make changes into our model so that they are compatible with Flask Security. So for that, what we need to do is from Flask Security, and in order to install Flask Security, what you can use the command, you can use this following command to install Flask Security 2. So right now we are using the Flask Security 2. So pip install Flask SECURITY Security 2. You can use Flask Security 2 to install Flask Security into your system. And this is the command to install that. Now once you have already in my system, it's already installed, so I won't be doing that, but you can use this following command to install the Flask Security 2. And now what we will do is from Flask Security security, we will import user mixins and role mixin. So these are the class which we would be inheriting when we are creating these models. So right now the models which we have created over here, right, you see these are basic Flask SQL Alchemy models, and we have not introduced a security into right now. But what we want to do is, when this user class inherits db.model, it should also inherit this particular class, which is user mixin. All right, and similarly, when we are creating this role models, this class should also inherit some functionalities with some functions which are defined to implement role mixin. So what has changed now? So these user mixins which you see over here, they have some defined functions like get a current user and get the ID of a user with the particular authentication token. So there are some predefined functions in these class which now are accessible, which we can use them when we are creating an object of the user class. And that's the advantage we are getting when we have imported this two user mixin and role mixin from the Flask Security. So this thing has been taken care. Now the next thing is we need to have an few important columns which we need to implement when we are defining this user model. Alright, so we have seen the advantage of using user mixins and role mixins, but we are not done with models to make them compatible with the Flask Security. We have to add additional information over here, additional columns which are responsible for handling the authentication token. So what we will do is, now first let's visit the documentation of the Flask Security, and we'll see what all things are necessary to implement the authentication token. So when you scroll down over here, you see we have the token authentication blog is over here, and it asks us to implement to put these three things over here. One is FS unifier and another is FS token unifier. So one is FS unifier and another is an FS unique token file, which are responsible for handling the unique authentication token. And this FS unique token unifier should be set to null. Unique is equals to true. This FS unifier is set to be unique is equals to true, but that is not requirement for the FS unique token unifier. All right, so let's implement these two columns as well as FS unifier. We'll put this FS unifier into our code, and we'll create one more column which is FS unifier, which would be db.column, and we can call it as a string 25. And I told you, right, this particular column should be unique, and so we can specify unique is equals to true, and we'll make it nullable is equals to false. And now the next thing is we also need to implement. So right, we could implement the Flask security with this fs unifier as well, but if now with this we cannot give the functionality for the user to change the password. And if we want to give that functionality that user can change their password, we need to implement fs token unifier, and then you can set as this as well as this needs not to be nullable. We have seen that in the documentation, and you can read about it, the documentation on why do we use this. So these two fields are necessary to implement these two columns. Implement in the user table is necessary. Right, we also need to let's put email ID as well. Nullable is false, unique is equals to true, unique is equals to true. Yeah, I think now from the perspective of the models we are set. All this thing we needed to do, that is we need to set a database, and when we are creating the database, the models should inherit from the user mixins, similarly the role mixins, and we need to have these two additional fields in the user model. Now if you want to set up the relationships between user model and role table, that you can as well do. You can let me set up the relationships as well. So I can say roles is equals to db.relationship. I can define my roles. I have defined a relationship, and it would be a many-to-many relationship between the user table and the role table. So once this thing is set up, let our app know that we are working with the db.init. Let our database know that we are working with this particular app, and we have done that. Okay, so once we have understood what all changes we need to make into our database, and now let's move ahead and initialize our security application. We will initialize the security Flask security in our application. So for that, what we will first we need is we will import from the Flask security. We will import security, and when we are importing security from the Flask security, we will also initialize over here. And we will also need, apart from the security, we will also need SQL Alchemy user data store. So since we are using SQL Alchemy for our models, we will be using SQL Alchemy user data store. So now let's create an user store first. User data store. STORE is SQL Alchemy. And now it will tell this is my model, this is my user model, the model which we have created, and that's the role table. Right, we have created the user data store, which is going to handle these user model as well as the role model, and we have initialized that. Now once the data store is initialized, what we can do is we can create an security. We can initialize the security now. So let's call it as an SECU. Here security is security, and we'll tell this is my app and this is my user data store. All right. So once this is done, now we have initialized our application as well. Now what we have to do is, after we have initialized the security as well as the user data store, we will now set up some configurations for our application. So let's start working with the configurations. So first we need to tell with which database I'm working. Right now let's initialize a new database, and we are creating using SQL database URI. We are setting the configuration to create a new database over here. We have done that. Now we will also use app.config, and we will set up the password salt, security password salt. That is the configuration in which we're going to set. So this is responsible for SECURITY security password salt, and that's we have set the password security password. Now we will also set the secret key. SECREAT, secret key, and we have set up some secret key, some random secret key for now. And so these two things, the security password salt and secret keys, are necessary to work with Flask Security. This is our database configuration, and now the initial setup which we needed to do for the Flask Security is done. What all we have implemented till now is how to understand and create about the models, what all changes we need to make in the models, how do we initialize our application, and how do we tell our application that we are working with in the scope of security. And that's all we have done till now. Now we are ready to create databases, and we are able to send the authentication token and stuff like that, which we will do in the next video. I'm going to create two parts of this video. In the first part, we have discussed the how do we do initialization of the Flask Security. In the next part, we will see how do we create and access the users and send the authentication token via APIs. So let's stop the video here. If you like the video, do share, subscribe the channel, and see you in the next video. Thank you so much.